I like that we're kicking off with you, that we're sort of reorientating our compass as we dig into the future of technology. And I think, first and foremost, we want to get a sense from you where we stand at the moment in terms of technologies intertwining with humanity and for all the good and bad that that might bring. I know you've got a few slides, perhaps, you can show us.
Yeah, I thought what we'd do is show just a couple slides to sort of frame where we are and how we got here. Can we switch to the keynote? Let's see if it comes up. And I'll make this super quick. There's a lot of things that seem to be going wrong in technology and society. There's sort of Hurricane Cambridge Analytica, Hurricane fake news, Hurricane tech addiction, Hurricane polarization, outrageification. And it's sort of like with climate change, you could say, oh my God, the coral reefs, the wildfires. But the question is there something behind all these hurricanes that's causing all of them to happen at once? And it's going to give you a quick intro. E.O. Wilson said that the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic, meaning ancient emotions, ancient brains. We have medieval institutions, and we have godlike technology. That this is the fundamental problem of humanity. E.O. Wilson was the father of sociobiology. And these three are operating at different clock rates. Our ancient Paleolithic brains are not changing, and it's the weakest point in the system. And while we were all watching out for the moment when technological progress crossed the line of human strengths and our IQ, that's when it took our jobs, that's when we get the singularity, this is what we're all obsessed with. There's a much earlier point when technology overwhelmed human weaknesses. And I want to argue that everything that's been going wrong that we're actually feeling in our personal lives and our families and our children starts from this point, and the super quick points are when it overwhelmed our cognitive limits, that's when we got information overload. That was the sort of Marshall Islands of our limited brains getting overloaded by technology. When it overwhelmed our dopamine, we feel that as addictive use or compulsive use, digital addiction. When it overwhelms our social validation, takes advantage of our self-image, we feel that as influencer culture, our confirmation bias and fake news, our outrage, and you get polarization. And when it overwhelms the limits and foundations of what we trust, you get bots and deepfakes. And so if you look at the right-hand column, all of those effects together represent a system, a mutually reinforcing system that we call human downgrading. And we can talk about that later. But I wanted to give this context because it helps set up a framework for why all these things are happening and a collective poisoning of different parts of the human social fabric.
I liked a phrase that we spoke about before, attention capitalism.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you think is driving the way in which technology is being built at the moment towards these negative effects and repercussions.
Yeah, so there's a lot of focus on sort of the data side of what's gone wrong with technology, but people tend to not focus on attention. If I say attention capitalism, people say, well, what's the big deal? Like, if you get my attention, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. But the point is that in the same way that in industrial capitalism, a whale is worth more dead than alive, a tree is worth more as lumber than as a living tree. In the attention capitalist model, a human being is worth more if they're addicted, outraged, polarized, disinformed, and narcissistic. Because that's better for producing effects in human attention. And in attention capitalism, capitalism is always looking for cheaper and cheaper ways of accomplishing a result. And you can think of attention as a kind of labor. So if I think about you, like it's really expensive to pay you at Bloomberg to sit in an office with...
Not nearly expensive
Not nearly expensive enough. But there's a cost to these big black box newsrooms. And man, that's really expensive. So we've got all this attention going to Bloomberg, and that's a really expensive way to generate human attention. So Facebook points its eyeballs at this Bloomberg box that's a really expensive way of generating human attention, says, hey, I could replace that and generate the same amount of attention if I got human chimpanzees to share links with each other back and forth and make them feel good about how smart they are. And I can generate the same amount of attention by social link sharing, because you'll do that work for free. All of us, we go to work on creating attentional labor for free for Facebook, because we're willing to post these links to look good to each other and generate the same amount of human attention, and Facebook sucks all the money out. And so that was the cheaper way of generating attention. A further cheaper way of generating attention is instead of paying the top of the food chain, the editors at Bloomberg, to edit and curate what's true, what's meaningful, what's moral, what we value in society, it's much cheaper to have algorithms do that. So let's fire the editors and let algorithms decide what we show people. And if you know with YouTube, 70% of YouTube's traffic now is driven by the recommendation system. But in each case, we're hollowing out our media and sense-making institutions and getting rid of the employees. There's fewer fact-checkers now at news organizations than there's ever been. So the quality of sense-making that's feeding us has been diminishing over time, and it's poisoned the information environment. So you can think of this happening everywhere all at once. It's kind of poisoning. It's like the Flint water supply, but for sort of our brains and information.
So the role of technology to help the businesses, I mean, you were a design ethicist at Google. Clearly, they were thinking about this. Facebook is talking much more about the investment they're making in human fact checkers, the third parties that they're involving. Yeah. Clearly, this is something that, due to public pressure or their own internal pressure, they're starting to respond to. How much responsibility does lie within the business itself?
I think the point is that these are not just private companies that are products that we use, like a regular private business where you walk over to that business, you pay for a service, you get a service. They don't have responsibility for their impact on society when you walk to, get that coffee from that one little coffee shop. But Facebook has actually taken over, and that's what's happening in general with technology. They're taking over, in the classic Mark Andreessen sense of software eating the world. YouTube has eaten up the Saturday morning cartoons of children's development. So they've taken over children's development. Children spend 6-7 hours a day now on screens. So you can think, like, no matter what great education you've got in that school, YouTube has an educational process conditioning their mind for about 6 hours, right? So in general, technology is taking over more and more parts of children's development, political advertising, our information public sphere. As it's gobbling up these parts of our social life, it has to take responsibility for that. So if you gobble up Saturday morning cartoons, and we used to have regulations and protections that said, what do we show children, what do we not show children? When YouTube takes that over, it doesn't preserve those protections. It actually gets rid of those protections. When Facebook gobbles up election advertising, and we used to have laws and regulations around equal price campaign ads, it should cost the same amount of money for one candidate and another candidate to run an ad at the same place, same time. But then Facebook gobbles that up, and they have an auction system that's run by a private technology company to get rid of all those regulations. So in general, as software eats the world, it's deregulation is eating the world, or the loss of protections is eating the world.
But my comeback to that is I have a 2-year-old who I see his addiction to my phone. He's really into Sesame Street on YouTube Kids. And I take it as my responsibility that he doesn't have 6 to 7 hours of it, and that he has 20 minutes, and that then I can put the controls in place on YouTube Kids to ensure that it is perhaps the more worthy things that he's watching. Equally, Facebook is now saying, look, actually, we will make it very transparent how much a political advert costs, and try to inform in that way, because they don't want to take away the freedom of speech or the freedom to have this debate in public. How do you think those responses are going?
So what you're getting at now is a question about responsibility. So how much if there's people believing a fake political ad, is it our responsibility, individuals' responsibility, or is it the company's responsibility? If people are addicted to YouTube, is it our responsibility that we didn't set up those time controls right? That's our fault. That's exactly what, it's sort of like BP. If you saw BP just did a tweet recently saying, like, do you want to know what your carbon footprint is? Use our carbon footprint calculator so you can manage your footprint.
No.
So they're putting the responsibility on the individual when the system is what creates the problem. And it actually takes attention away from the system. And the reason I'm so critical of the system is because I'm concerned about the objective raw results that we're seeing. So Facebook shut down 2.2 billion fake accounts in 3 months.
Given they've got 2.7 billion users, isn't it?
There's 2.7 billion users of Facebook, real people, and in 3 months they shut down 2.2 billion fake accounts. So I'm sure they got all of them, right? Now, if you then ask, so they've had 35,000 content moderators, right? They upped that number. In fact, they're saying now that they spend more money on trust and safety, which is their entire sort of trust, safety, policing, content moderation process, than they made in all of their revenue when they went public in 2012. They actually spend more money on trust and safety. I'm giving their talking points now. They spend more money on trust and safety than all of Twitter's revenue last year totally, right? So that sounds like a lot of money. They're really investing in this. But the raw results of this have not borne out very well. There's still, I mean, we all know, you saw yesterday, 2 days ago, the Facebook employees basically rebelling and saying, look, this is actually producing bad results. We need stronger controls on political advertising. If you look at YouTube, let's just take that example because I know it better in terms of the raw stats. One of the problems is that we're on the outside. We don't actually know what all the data is about how bad it is on the inside. But with YouTube, for example, if you let their machines recommend what to show kids, there's these many examples where it shows these disturbing videos of Spider-Man with machine guns shooting up the Hulk, and these playing sing-along songs, really, really disturbing stuff. There's stuff around child pedophilia where it recommends videos. If you watch one video of a kid, a young person dancing in front of the camera, it'll start recommending through comment trails, it starts recommending these other videos of young kids dancing. It sends people down the rabbit hole. TikTok is just like this too, not to even just put attention on Facebook and YouTube. YouTube recommended Alex Jones videos. You know Alex Jones, InfoWars, conspiracy theories, 15 billion times. And when I say recommended, I don't mean there's like 15 billion times people clicking on and wanting that and searching for it. I mean 15 billion times that it was recommending that to people. And so it's poisoning the information environment because disinformation is outcompeting information. There's an MIT Twitter study that on Twitter, fake news spreads 6 times faster than true news. And it makes sense because fake things are an unconstrained organism. It can evolve in any direction. It can keep making up and manufacturing good-sounding lies, and you can keep A/B testing the things that work. The truth is very constrained. There's only so many things the truth can be, and it can't necessarily always be sexy or salacious or outrageous. So the truth is generally outcompeted by the other things. So, you take 2 other facts, which is on YouTube, climate denial videos outcompeted, or actually about 50% recommended compared to the climate consensus videos. So you wonder, why does everybody not just believe in this obvious thing that we have to get ahead of? And then you take a third fact, which is the best predictor of whether someone will believe in a conspiracy theory, is whether they already believe in one conspiracy theory. And it's never been easier to believe in your first sort of gateway drug conspiracy theory. So when you add all this up, I'm going pretty fast, but the cost of this is it has poisoned our information environment at a time when we need to be making unprecedentedly accurate sense of the world and agreeing with each other about the world. It has been pulling us apart. And it's really, really serious. And it's not intentionally because of bad people, but it is because of a business model and attention capitalism that is trying to find the cheapest and most efficient way of generating that attentional labor with algorithms, and that produces this bad result.
The fix, then. You're obviously debating this internally every single day, and the companies are spending ferocious amounts of money to try and fix it. They are injecting humans back into the situation, but perhaps from your argument, not doing it quickly enough and not successfully enough. How are you thinking about steadying the ship to a certain extent?
Yeah. Well, the core thing, and that's why I started with, if you saw in the opening slides on the right-hand side, all those different problems, we take as our problem statement not just let's fix the information environment, but the whole thing, the shortening of attention spans, the polarization, the narcissism, the unnecessary narcissism, which is an undervalued one, because teen mental health issues have risen by 170%. It's called high depressive symptoms for 10 to 14-year-old girls, went up by 170% after 2 decades in decline. And it went up by that much in the last 5-6 years. So I say that because in terms of how do we reverse this, we don't just want to reverse one of these issues, we need to reverse all of them. It's like climate change. So you have to get to the root issue. The root issue is the attention business model. And the fastest way to do that is to simply not have business models where where essentially huge supercomputers are pointed at our brains with an incentive to create changes in our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Just like we went off the gold standard where our entire financial system was pegged to how much mineral deposits of gold we can scrape out of the physical earth, our entire stock prices of these big companies, $1.5 trillion of market value, is directly coupled to the attention standard, how much attention we can scoop out of the brains of children and out of the brains of our democracy. So we have to decouple those things. And that means things like Jaron Lanier's proposal of data dividends, so money's flowing back to us. If you're familiar with Jaron Lanier's work on data labor unions, this is stuff you can look up online, and also simply paying subscription fees is the sort of quick answer, is that we should be paying for services so that they're on our team instead of on someone else's team.
So sort of reward the user, the person, for the data that they exchange to a certain extent.
That's one part of it. Now that sets up a perverse incentive. So I'm going to be really honest about it. So if we see that the if Facebook still is an automated attention mapping machine that's mapping lies into people's brains with high precision accuracy, but now it's paying us as it does that. It's like the digital Frankenstein is wrecking the world and it hands us 50 cents every month to do that. That's not what we want. So we have to also pay to actually align the goals of all the engineers to be on our side. And it's not just the ad that's the problem, it's the entire incentive system to modify your behavior. I think people don't really get that in terms of the personal responsibility thing, there's a supercomputer pointed at your brain every day when you use these systems. And so when you scroll and you say, you know, I'm going to be done, I'm just going to scroll one more thing, and you find out, oh man, I'm going to keep scrolling a little bit more. We literally do this every single day, right? And we think that's our responsibility. But it's not, because on the other side of the screen is a supercomputer with an avatar voodoo doll version of Caroline. And the hair of the voodoo doll is all the likes you've ever made. And the clothing of the voodoo doll is all the shares you've ever made. And so the voodoo doll looks and acts more and more like you because the more data you feed it, the more accurate a model I can build of you. So when you think, I'm going to scroll one more time and then I'm done, what actually happens is they can actually prick your voodoo doll with all these a million different possibilities. They know exactly what's going to happen when they show you this next 3 content items. So it's like playing chess against a supercomputer and you're going to lose. It's seeing way more moves ahead. Once we all realize that, all human beings, being inside of a limited monkey meat suit brain, are on the same team. Because we're all trapped inside of this system. It's like the Matrix, where the asymmetry is growing every day.
What pushed you out of, what made you think, I can't work for Google as an ethicist, design ethicist anymore? Was there, because I feel like we're so keen to point out the negativity, the bad news, the bad ramifications of technology, and we forget the good, the things that my child is learning through YouTube, the fact that I am able to connect via WhatsApp with his grandmother who's sat all the way in London, the way that we are able to go to a new small business and give money to them by, you know, well-manufactured goods and know the source, etc. Was it just you had too much of the negativity and that's what pushed you out?
I'm sure people can guess, given how I'm talking, why I wouldn't stay at Google for too long. I want to say that I actually am I don't want to say I'm an optimist. Jaron Lanier has this quote that the critics are the true optimists because those are the ones who are willing to see what's wrong so we can actually get to the world that actually is better. I used to be a technologist. In fact, I met someone on your staff here who's backstage when I was actually building a startup that we got acquired into Google. So I've done the tech entrepreneur thing. I know how the products are built. My friends started Instagram. We both studied at the same labs at Stanford. You know, I get the positives. I think they're unquestionable. The question is a problem of business model. And, you know, if we didn't have business models that are about mining and extracting and treating human beings as the resources to get things out of, but treated us instead with dignity and as sort of the customer, not the product, that's just the change that we need to make. And I think that if we can get there, all this stuff looks so much better. I mean, it is magic that I can hit a button on my phone and 30 seconds from now I could walk out into the street and a car shows up and takes me where I want to go. We live in a magical world. It's like I'm just advocating for a humane technology world that's way more about that and not about all the stuff that's destroying our society.
Does regulation change the business model or change the way in which the business is focused rather than on attention? Is that what needs to happen? Or?
Yes, there's 2 avenues that are fastest for making this change. Well, the fastest is actually what you saw just 2 days ago with Facebook's own employees basically pressuring Facebook from the inside saying this is still our company. If you saw the rhetoric in their note, very powerful, and saying we need actually even better standards for political advertising. So in other words, if Facebook or Google or TikTok's own employees say, I don't want to be participating in the poisoning of the mental health of a generation or poisoning the information ecology, that is the fastest lever for change because it's way faster to have an internal HR crisis you have to respond to than to respond to legislation that takes 2 years before it actually gets here. So that's really the most exciting news is the way that internal people who see it this way are waking up and saying, I don't want to be participating in this bad business model and creating that internal pressure. And we've been working with a lot of those folks and focus a lot on that. The second is on legislation. Senator Mark Warner has actually been leading this quite a bit. He just released a bill called the Access Bill to create more interoperability between platforms. So if you just make one analogy, of, remember AOL's monopoly back in the day, and we all used AOL Instant Messenger. That was the chat client. They had this vertical integration between AOL and the messaging. And one of the things that happened is they went under, as I understand it, some regulation to force AOL Instant Messenger to become open. So they had to loosen it up so you could have different clients talking to AOL Instant Messenger. You could have iChat, Jabber, ICQ, whatever, talking to that network. The access bill that Senator Warner just introduced is very similar. It creates more interoperability, so you can move a group of people, this is how it should work, you can move a group of people from Facebook onto a new social network and have interoperability. It's like being able to click, migrate your phone number from AT&T to Verizon, click, move my bank account from Wells Fargo to JP Morgan, that kind of thing. And I think we need that kind of competition to force and loosen up the monopoly grip of the big companies.
Interesting. I want to get audience participation now, because I'm sure you have some questions on and of yourself. We've got some roving microphones ready to dash to you. So put up your hand if you do have a question for Tristan. Yes, gentleman just down here. Please just say who you are and what your question is.
Sure. I'm Cordell Schachter. I'm the CTO of New York City's Department of Transportation. Do you think that the Electronic Frontier Foundation has society's best interests in mind as you describe them, or are they just another outlet for big tech?
Oh, I don't think the EFF is an outlet for big tech by any means, but I'm not an expert. They've tended, though, historically, to be on the sort of techno-libertarian side, that it's all about, the clearest way to say it is the EFF is fighting against Orwellian 1984 dystopias, so we want to protect civil liberties, but there's this other dystopia, which is the Aldous Huxley dystopia, which is where control of society isn't by restricting access to information or overwhelming you with surveillance. It's actually by saturating people in trivia, egoification, and noise. And that's the dystopia that we're protecting against. But I think the EFF is a credible organization, and they do great work.
Thank you. Great question. Next one. Anyone else going to? Oh, yes.
I have a quick question here. Justin, you mentioned paying for subscriptions to sort of, reward the kind of information process that you want. What does the recent decision by Facebook, for instance, and Apple to pay news organizations in order to have their full content on their platforms, does that change the dynamic in your view? Is that like a DMZ between those two ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, I haven't, things are changing so fast these days, right? That's part of the problem of the attention economy, that I'm not actually familiar with all the recent Facebook news announcements, is the honest truth. In general, I almost think of it as like a restorative justice fund, that they actually owe the news and media and journalism sort of environments, like to repatriate the money back into the media ecology that we've actually lost. And so I don't know what the effects are going to be. I think the challenge with these things is whatever analysis that one would do to figure out if that was going to be a good decision, Facebook has the actual data that would show us, that would let us decide how good or bad that might be. From the outside, it's very hard to tell and do the economic analysis. That's one of the problems.
Another question?
Hello, Alan Grafman. First, sensational comments. Thank you. They're extremely illuminating. My question is whether you draw any lessons from what is going on in, let's say, Russia and China. The future has been described in books like 1984, and just a few days ago we were reported, or the New York Times reported activity in China. I'm curious whether you've seen any lessons that you're working hard to incorporate in your activity.
Yeah, the Chinese authoritarian sort of model is really alarming, which I think is all sort of self-evident to people. I think the really big question, if you zoom out, is right now digital authoritarianism, digital closed systems, digital closed authoritarian systems outcompete digital open systems, because digital open systems are vulnerable to anyone participating, aka Russian bots, Iranian bots, Saudi Arabian bots, like poisoning the information ecology, spreading noise, distracting us, confusing us. The RAND Corporation has a name for this. It's called truth decay, the erosion of truth, the RAND Corporation, the military corporation. So I think the real challenge we have to figure out, and maybe this is going to be something people can talk about later, is how does a digital open system outcompete the digital closed system? And that's the key question that, frankly, we in the West have to answer. What does a new social network look like that enables participation, that enables conversation, that is not censorship, but that actually produces better sense-making and better choice-making amongst everybody participating? And that's the big question that we have to be asking, I think.
There's a female on the front here.
Irina Marinescu, FinTech lawyer at Paul Hastings. Apropos of your comment about sort of access to data and interoperability, what do you think about the promise of decentralized platforms to sort of bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think decentralized platforms are offering a new capability that will help us. I think there's a lot of reasons, though, to be concerned about it. Like, you know, you talk to Twitter, for example. If you think today is bad, where you can dox someone or have exponential hate speech or all this kind of stuff, and or you can spread lies, and Facebook eventually may take it down, or you can complain enough. In a decentralized world where there is no police force, there is no one home, there's no one staffing a trust and safety team, you actually have no one you can go to. And so the decentralized platforms don't automatically solve these issues. I think there's a lot of people in the decentralized blockchain community who are dealing with the data issues, but again, I ask you, if you step into your privacy utopia, your data utopia, you'd still see shortening of attention spans, polarization, outrageification, narcissism, because the attention part wouldn't have gone away. So the way the decentralized community can really help is creating platforms that decouple that incentive so that the attention incentives are not connected to the design of the product. And there's some new design procedures we have to kind of go about to do that.
Time for one last question, I think. There's a gentleman at the back or a gentleman.
Hi, Daniel Weiser, Redeploy. You mentioned Jaron Lanier earlier. So it seems like you're positive on his idea of a new internet. To make that a reality, or just your vision a reality, what is something that there's a lot of power in this room? So I'm in favor of it. What can I do, or what can anyone else here do?
Thank you. It's a great question. This is one I wish I had much better answers to. We're a nonprofit, by the way, who works full-time on these issues. We're trying to build a movement and mobilizing people. There's a network. We say that this is sort of like the climate change of culture, but unlike climate change, only about 1,000 people between regulators, top designers, VCs, some top product managers, leadership at companies have to change, meaning only 1,000 people have to change what they're doing. Instead of in climate change, you have to change hundreds of companies across hundreds of countries. So we're mobilizing people. We have a podcast called Your Undivided Attention, where we're trying to using as a center point to walk through the problem with people. You can subscribe to it online. And we're pushing for things. I know Jaron, we worked together on a couple things. I don't think that there's been enough of we haven't done a good enough job, frankly, between those of us in the activist community of finding easy ways for people to sign on and pledge. So I think we need to do a better job of that so that we can invite more people into the conversation. But we do need your help by leaps and bounds. So thank you for asking the question.
A call to arms. Tristan Harris, our time is up. I want to thank you so much for spending this morning with you, and give it up to Tristan Harris. Thank you very much.